So let us begin. My name is Fran Casey. I'm the Director of Community Affairs here at DePaul University, and we are so delighted that you could all join us this evening. This is the Lincoln Park Community Research Initiative's 25th program. We began in the 1998-99 centennial year, and here we are all these years later, having this wonderful program, Lincoln Park on a Pedestal. If this is your first time here, let me tell you briefly that the research initiative is a partnership between DePaul University and the Lincoln Park community. That would be all of you. The purpose of the research initiative is to collect, document, preserve, and celebrate our shared history in this neighborhood for the past 114 years. We've been here that long. I know you haven't been here that long, but we have been, and we are so happy to work on this project together with the community. The members of the research initiative are listed in your programs. All of their names are there, but I would ask, just because they all work so hard and they do so much for the research initiative, if they would just stand and be recognized so everybody could see how wonderful you are. To encourage contributions to the archives, the Lincoln Park collection, which is housed in the Richardson Library here on campus, we have these programs twice a year that highlight some aspect of history in Lincoln Park. Tonight's program will focus on the historical significance and artistic contributions of sculpture in Lincoln Park. And really, we are so gratified that so many of you are interested in our program. We have three wonderful presenters tonight. We have author Krista August, we have architect Mark Sullivan, and we have world-renowned sculptor Richard Hunt. And we will be introducing them in a more formal way in a second. Our moderator for this evening is Julia Bachrach. Julia Bachrach is the historian and preservationist for the Chicago Park District, and actually, this is Julia's second time doing a program here for us for the research initiative. She did one several years ago, specifically on the parks in Lincoln Park. And speaking of that, Julia has a brand new book out called The City in a Garden, A History of Chicago Parks, following A City in a Garden, the photographic history of Chicago parks, which she did a few years ago. Julia started at the Chicago Park District in 1988. In that period of time, she has surveyed the parks, documented what's in the parks, has worked very hard to maintain the historical significance of the park, and managed to write 5 books in her spare time. So with that, I'm going to let Julia really introduce in detail our presenters tonight. And our presenters will make their presentations for the first 45 minutes, and when they're through, then we open up our program to you for questions or comments or just simply applause. So with that, Julia Bachrach.
Thank you, Fran. It's a delight to be here, especially in this gorgeous space. And Fran sent me all of these bios of my esteemed colleagues who are going to be speaking tonight, and I didn't have the foresight to print this out in a larger font. So if you see me squinting, you'll know why. So I'm thrilled to be here. Fran told you the structure of the evening. We're going to have our panelists go just kind of 1, 2, 3 in an order so that we have plenty of time to hear from you. So if you have questions, ideas, things you want them to comment on, make a little note or mental note, because at the end we want to have lots of time for discussion. Our first speaker tonight will be Krista August. Krista is a resident of Ravenswood, and she is one of 3 Chicago area authors to be awarded the Book of the Year by the Chicago Writers Association. Ms. August is an alumnus of DePaul University, and her book, of course, hopefully you saw it as you came in, and you're going to be learning about tonight, is called Giants in the Park, A Guide to Portrait Statues in Chicago's Lincoln Park. And if you haven't seen it, in addition to some beautifully done text, and I have to say I did have an opportunity to meet her because she worked in our archives. She did, oh, I'm sorry, you can't sit in those seats. Those are our seats. Okay, I know you were trying to be very sort of incognito here, but so Krista did these incredible illustrations, and you'll be seeing them in her presentation. The book has been very well reviewed, and one of the reviewers said it includes a collection of crisp, clear, and well-researched stories about the people depicted by these bronze figures, as well as the people who funded and sculpted these historical treasures. So Krista will be our first speaker. Our second speaker will be Mark Sullivan. So obviously you know who Krista is, beautiful blonde here. Our second speaker is Mark Sullivan, and Mark is the president and managing principal of Sullivan Goulet. Did I say that right? No. Goulet, okay. Goulet, and maybe if it were French it would be Goulet or something. Goulet and Wilson Limited. He was a co-founder of the firm in 1994 and oversees its operations, including urban design and land planning. Mr. Sullivan is a registered architect in the states of Illinois, Florida, Michigan, Maine, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Hawaii. That was smart of you to get registered in Hawaii. I like that. He is a member of the Association of Licensed Architects, the National Town Builders Association, the Congress for New Urbanism, the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards, and the Chicago chapter of the Home Builders Association, as well as the International Code Council, and he sits on the Home Builders Association board for Greater Chicago. And our third speaker is our very esteemed sculptor, Richard Hunt. He was born in 1935 on the south side of Chicago, and from an early age he was very interested in art, and his mother was an artist. As a young boy, Richard began to show enthusiasm and talent in artistic disciplines, and he developed his skills first at the Junior School of the Art Institute and later at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He also acquired business sense and awareness of social issues from working for his father in a barber shop. Hunt began to experiment with materials and sculpting techniques influenced heavily by progressive 20th century artists. This experimentation garnered critically positive response from the art community, such that Hunt was exhibited at the Artists of Chicago and Vicinity Show and the American Show, where the Museum of Modern Art purchased a piece for its collection. He was the youngest artist to exhibit at the 1962 Seattle World's Fair. Hunt has completed more public sculptures than any other artist in the country. His signature pieces include Jacob's Ladder at the Carter Woodson Library in Chicago, the Flintlock Fantasy, and Flintlock Fantasy in Detroit. And you didn't put it on here, but I know you either have or had a piece in the Rose Garden at the White House. Oh, it was temporary, but still, that's an amazing thing, an amazing accomplishment. He was appointed by President Lyndon Johnson as one of the first artists to serve on the governing board of the National Endowment for the Arts, and he also served on the boards of the Smithsonian Institution. He is a recipient of numerous awards and honorary degrees. I think he's really a Chicago treasure, and he also is a local resident. I don't know if many of you probably know this, but I was reminding Mr. Hunt that I met him years ago when the Park District was talking with him about doing something, and he's got several works in our parks, but he lives in an old CTA barn, so that it's just got this ginormous vertical height, which is wonderful for somebody who creates these massive, amazing works of sculpture. So now what we're going to do is we're going to leave Krista alone up here so that she can have her turn. The rest of us are going to go down and sit with you in the audience, and then just 1, 2, 3, we're going to switch out the speakers, and then at the end you'll have a chance to talk to all of them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I am delighted to be here to participate in this excellent discussion. For 3 years, I worked on writing and illustrating Giants in the Park because I thought it was important to document and celebrate the history of the monuments in Lincoln Park, and there are many of them. This map shows the southern end of Lincoln Park, where all of the vintage portrait statues are located. And when I say portrait, I mean a statue that depicts and celebrates a specific person or a specific group of people. You can see in this area of the park, which is between North Avenue and Belmont, there are many portrait statues. There's a handful of missing portrait statues, and there are other important monuments that are wonderful to learn about. What I would like to do today is highlight in some detail 3 statues from the park so that you can get an idea of the rich history that can be enjoyed when we pay attention to our public sculpture. The first statue I want to highlight is the most significant to Chicago's history. This is our statue of Renee de La Salle, the first European to travel the full length of the Mississippi River. And upon reaching the mouth of the Mississippi River, he boldly claimed for France the Mississippi River and all the land it drained. And with those words, France was able to increase its claim on the whole inner continent. This accomplishment by La Salle was hard-won over 13 difficult years. Indians, men who deserted and stole from him, ships that were filled with valuable provisions that wrecked, and creditors back home in Montreal who seized his assets when he was away. This is an incomplete list of the hardships that he had to overcome in the course of his adventures. You may wonder what would drive someone to devote 13 years of his life to this task. Well, historians believe that La Salle was likely looking for a northwest passage to the Orient. And had he discovered this legendary Northwest Passage, it would have been a way for him to create great wealth. Now, when La Salle first began his series of expeditions, it wasn't obvious to him how to get there. He wasn't really quite sure where the Mississippi River was. But after trial and error, he learned that the best way to go was via the Great Lakes water system. This map with that red line shows the approximate route in which La Salle was ultimately successful. And you can see from the map that he started near Montreal, went up the St. Lawrence River, through the Great Lakes, he exited Lake Michigan, and traveled through Illinois in our river systems here to the Mississippi River. Now let's take a closer look at how he left Lake Michigan. In his final voyage, the voyage in which he was successful in 1682, he left Lake Michigan via the Chicago River, and he and his men paddled their canoes south to where the river dead-ended into Mud Lake. Now, Mud Lake doesn't exist today, but it existed in La Salle's time, and at that time, it was just another obstacle for him. At this point, he and his men got out of their canoes and portaged, meaning that they carried their canoes across Mud Lake or around Mud Lake to get to the Des Plaines River, which took them to the Illinois River, which took them to the Mississippi River. Now this map is very simple, but it shows us a very large idea, an idea that explorers like La Salle and Joliet understood, that this site, which is today Chicago, is located very strategically between 2 great water systems, the eastern flowing Great Lakes water system and the southern flowing Mississippi water system. And so he understood when he came back to this site in the winter of 1682, 1683, that this was a location for a future settlement, an excellent location. After reaching the mouth of the Mississippi in April of 1682, like I said, he returned to the portage of Chicago, which is what he called it, in the winter of 1682, 1683, because we all know it's so nice to be in Chicago in the wintertime. And he He spent some time and he wrote a letter, and he wrote about the future of this site. And this is what he wrote. Through this point, quote, the boundless regions of the West must send their products to the East. This will be the gate of empire. This, the seat of commerce. Everything invites to action. So who's responsible for us having this wonderful monument that reminds us of this important history? Well, it was Lambert Tree, who was for a time a judge for the Cook County Circuit Courts, and he went on in life to become an ambassador to Belgium. And while serving in Belgium, he commissioned a Belgian artist, Jacques Delalande, to create this gorgeous monument. It was unveiled in 1889, and at that ceremony, a letter was read, written by Judge Lambert Tree, and I just want to read to you a very brief excerpt from that letter that was read at the ceremony. Lambert Tree wrote, LaSalle was a man devoted to great designs, from the pursuit of which neither danger, fatigue, famine, disease, disappointment, nor treachery could divert him. It is impossible to trace the immense course of his journeys on this continent through winter blasts and southern suns without arriving at the conclusion that he was a hero of the highest type, to whose geographical discoveries American civilization was a heavy debt. It's right there, bottom The next statue that I'd like to focus on is the most important statue in Lincoln Park. We should all know in Chicago that our Lincoln Park Lincoln statue is arguably the most successful Lincoln statue that there is. And as proof of that, I'd like to offer you this fact, that when the Lincoln Memorial was being planned in the early 1900s, there was a movement that thought that they could do no better than to create an enlarged replica of our statue in Lincoln Park. The statue was donated by Eli Bates, who was a Chicago lumber merchant. He left money in his will. And at the unveiling ceremony in 1887, 10,000 people came out, including Lincoln's sole surviving son, Robert Todd Lincoln, and Lincoln's grandson, who was 14, whose name was Abraham Lincoln, who unveiled the statue. Now, this is not the unveiling ceremony, but it gives you an idea of what the unveiling ceremony might have looked like. The artist behind this wonderful piece of art is Augustus Saint-Gauden. He was in his mid-30s at the time that he was awarded this commission. And at the height of his career, he was the ranking sculptor in America. He was not only important in the area of sculpture, but in all the arts. When there was a major architectural project or a major painting exhibition, his opinion was sought because his tastes were so revered. There are two things that I'd like to highlight about Gauden. First of all, he was a perfectionist. He was known for not letting anything leave his studio until he was absolutely satisfied. And in one case, he worked on a commission for 11 years, destroyed it twice, and began again until he got what he was satisfied with. The second thing I'd like to highlight about Gauden is his rare talent. Like other artists, Gauden had this special ability to make a very good depiction of a subject, a very good likeness. But Gauden was superior to most other artists in that he did not just give us a likeness. He had this special talent to celebrate the character of a man. So when you look at his works, you sense this inner life within. This statue, because it's so successful, has been analyzed, and I'd like to share with you some of what has been said. People talk about the right side of the body with the arm behind his back and that weight firmly on his right leg. That into this we can see Lincoln's great strength and his tenacity. The left side of the body with his left foot forward and the hand upon his lapel. Into this we can read that Lincoln was a man of courage and a man of action. Gauden has Lincoln's head tilted forward, and into this we see so much that we know about Lincoln, that he was a humble man, that he had a powerful intellect, that there was a lot of sadness in his life, and that the presidency was a terrible burden for him. One of the things that Gauden did that made his works so great was that he often added symbolism. So in this case, he gives us the chair, which symbolizes the presidency. The eagle with outstretched wings on the back of the chair symbolizes American sovereignty. There are pine cones on the four sides of the chair. Pine cones are the fruit of the evergreen tree and are symbols of eternal life. And the lion's paws at the base of the legs are traditionally symbols of rebirth. When you take it all together, you can read that this nation was reborn under Lincoln, and it was reborn in a form that would stand the test of time. The last thing about Gauden that made his work stand out was that he often worked with architects, and in this case he partnered with Stanford White, who designed the setting, the pedestal, and Stanford White also helped with the chair. And the setting with the seating around it, he was encouraging people to sit and enjoy this wonderful monument and the history that it represented. The last statue that I want to celebrate today is the most prominent statue in Lincoln Park. This is our statue of Ulysses S. Grant, who was the general that led the Union Army to victory, and then he went on to serve 2 terms as president. One of the most fascinating things in the reading that I did was to learn that while we often think of Lincoln as being the most important man of the 1800s, and probably he was, when it comes to popularity, it was Grant who was by far the most popular man of the century. Why? Because it was Grant who figured out how to end the war. Grant was so widely regarded a hero across the nation that he was nominated and elected president twice without ever campaigning. He didn't give any campaign speeches. He didn't ask for any votes. After serving 2 terms as president and refusing to run for a 3rd term, at least at that time, I think it's interesting to note that Grant took more than 2 years to travel the world with his wife Julia, and everywhere he went, he received a hero's welcome from dignitaries and crowds of people. He was world famous. When Chicagoans learned of Grant's passing from throat cancer in 1885, it was merchandiser millionaire Potter Palmer who first called for a Grant statue for Lincoln Park, or for Chicago rather. And the idea was so popular that nearly 100,000 patriots came forward to donate money from 25 cents all the way up to $5,000, so that enough money was collected before Grant was even buried. And when all was said and done, the monument cost about $75,000 at the time, which in today's money is about $1.8 million. And now I want to tell you about the unveiling ceremony. It was by far the most widely attended of all the ceremonies in Lincoln Park. Newspapers reported that some 200,000 people came out for the festivities on that day. 20,000 people met first downtown at the auditorium building, and they marched north in a parade that took about an hour and a half celebrating his life. Our Grant statue is an 18-foot high bronze which stands atop a massive granite pedestal so that it rises to a height of about 61 feet, well above the height of all the other statues. I believe, when you consider his popularity and all the facts behind this monument, that I believe that Chicagoans were making a statement, that they made this dominating structure because they wanted people of the day and all future generations to know that Grant was loved, honored, and respected above all others. He is shown up on his horse, Cincinnati, and it has been said that Grant was probably the best horseman of all of the Army, and to read stories about his talents on horseback is really great entertainment. There's one story when he was a cadet at West Point, and he rode into an arena to do a stunt at a graduation ceremony, and he charged his horse and jumped over a bar that was set at 6 feet 3 inches high, which was a record at the Academy for a number of years. The artist depicts Grant on his horse Cincinnati, which was apparently his best horse in the Civil War, and Grant described Cincinnati as being the finest horse that he had ever seen, and so he was very protective of Cincinnati. He rarely let anyone mount him, but there were 2 exceptions. One was the man who saved his life when he was a young man, and the other one was Abraham Lincoln. In that final month of the war, when Lincoln spent so much time with Grant, he rode Cincinnati every day. I'll finish by answering a question that we often hear here in Chicago. Why is there a Grant statue in Lincoln Park and a Lincoln statue in Grant Park? Well, there is a Lincoln statue in both parks, and by the way, both parks, the statue was done by Augustus Saint-Gauden. And there's a Grant statue in Lincoln Park because there was no Grant Park in 1891 when this statue was installed. Grant Park wasn't named Grant Park until 1901. And at that time, it was not the great place of leisure that it is today. So Lincoln Park was the obvious place. But I do think that it is interesting to note that when we do name Grant Park in 1901, 36 years after the Civil War is over, 16 years after Grant has passed, that we name it after Ulysses S. Grant because he was the most popular man of the century.
Good evening. I'm Mark Sullivan. It's my pleasure to present the National Shrine for Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini this evening. It's a project I've been working on for 10 years, so 15 minutes is going to be nothing. I'd love to talk about this project. Tonight what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of background about Mother Cabrini and what she did and what she meant to Chicago and why she was our first American saint in the Vatican, and she has the last statue above the altar in the Vatican. So she's really special for Chicago, and she's really a very special lady. She grew up as a young woman in Codogno, Italy, modest means. Her father was fairly successful. She was raised and educated as a teacher. She went into the sisterhood and wanted to help people. So she went to the Pope and she said, Father, I'd like to go and become a missionary and help people in China. Pope said, okay, well, these Americas are starting to, really take off in the 1900s. I'd really like you to go to America and establish hospitals for Italian immigrants, because Italian immigrants weren't being treated in the hospitals here. So she listened and she came to the Americas. Her first stop obviously was New York, where she set up a beachhead, and she, still to this day, they have quite a few properties there and hospitals which they run. But then she came to Chicago, and she bought a old hotel, which is at the corner of Lakeview and St. James. It was about a 119-room hotel. She bought that, and she started that as the first hospital. She then went on to Seattle, Denver, New Orleans, Peru, Argentina, Africa, and in her life she made 28 crossings across the Atlantic. So she was really quite special. She was really a woman that got around and established these missions and really was very, very special. Anyway, back to Chicago. So she buys this hotel in the early part of the 1900s, and it's set up as a hospital. And I've got a little funny story at the end. She found the best talent that she possibly could, and they came and they were surgeons. They were serving the Italian immigrants. She also started Assumption School, which is still there today. It's a condo building now, but it's down in Erie. She started Cabrini Hospital, which is down on the U of I campus. That one's closed. She had St. Anthony Hospital, which is out on the west side. That's still there today and operating, not by the sisters, but it's operating. She also has a retreat center on Des Plaines, which is still operating today. And she had a very large tract of land in Park Ridge, which they farmed because she brought her own fresh produce to the hospitals. So she was really quite a special lady. She died, she gets canonized, we move forward, and they build a hospital, which is Columbus Hospital, and that was built in the early mid-1950s. And 50 years later, I come into the picture, and they want to sell the hospital. So the sisters are a great order of nuns, great people. Like I said, I've been working with them for 10 years. I love them dearly. And they are very smart, and they have specialists help them out in every area of their business. So they had a business manager, they had an attorney, but then when they were selling this land, they really didn't have an architect that could advise them on development, construction issues, and the land sale. So I stepped into the picture. So I started advising them when they were selling the property and selling the hospital, which, you know, I've been a Chicago resident my whole life, living in Lincoln Park for 25 years. I never knew this chapel was back there. It was totally surrounded by the hospital. So the business manager and the attorney, you know, they showed me the chapel, they showed me the church, and they told me what they wanted to do. I helped them out with the negotiations with the first developer. We went through issues. I helped them out in rehabbing the chapel itself, because we knew it was going to get cocooned and pretty much shut down and closed for 10 years. So we did everything we could to protect it. And that developer wasn't able to make the deal happen. It fell into dormancy for a number of years, and then the current developer took it over, and I think GE was behind them. They had plenty of cash, and you see what's built. Some of you might have been involved in the neighborhood meetings to give them approvals. Anyway, what I was left with was three main areas that we focused on. The chapel itself, then there was some land over here, which I told them from day one. I said, look, this building's on your land. Do you know that? They didn't pay attention for like the first 5 years until it was a little bit late for the developer to change his plan back out. That worked out really well for them. So we did a little bit more negotiating, a little bit more trading. We gave the developer this piece of land. In return, we were able to grab this space over here, which is a really delightful garden. I've got some renderings of that, which is used for the sisters, and also the bigger building can use this. This is a very large house that's going up right now. And then this is actually right here, the high-rise. So our chapel abuts the high-rise. And for us, that was quite interesting, because we've never had a commission where we did anything like that. So we worked probably for the next 3 or 4 years with the developer of the high-rise to protect the sisters' interests and to make sure that everything we needed to have done to the chapel mechanically and physically was taken care of. And through all these different negotiations, like I said, we got the garden, but we also got this space here, which is about 5,000 square feet of space. Again, this was a really unique client. I've never worked with a client like this before. That's probably why I have so much, blood, sweat, and tears into this. They never gave me a program. They never told me what they wanted. They never told me how they were going to use the space. They just listened to everything I said, and they said, okay, all right, let's do that. Okay. It was a little scary for me. I've never had that before. So it put a lot of pressure on me to really perform and make sure we did the best job we could for them. But one of the things that they traded, I said back in this area, was, and maybe some of you have gone there, was a shrine for Mother Cabrini. Because in the hospital, I told you she bought the building in the early 1900s. They went and built the Columbus Hospital. She died here. She died in that hospital, the current Columbus, or the old hospital. And that's why this is a really sacred space for them. And that's why they do have shrines in Denver and in Seattle, but this is really the national shrine. And this is really where the major relics are, and this is really where they feel that Mother Cabrini's home was. So that they really put a lot of weight on this, and again, it's a lot of pressure on me not knowing anything of what they want to do. So what we said to them, well, look, if you can, forego this land over here, we can create in this new space, we can create a new shrine for Mother Cabrini. So in this space over here, we've recreated the shrine, recreated the room in which she passed away, and we have some other historical elements in here which explain a lot of the same things I've talked to you about today. This additional space also gave us the ability, they always had this perpetual easement, because they're kind of like the center of the donut hole in this site here. The developer owns everything around them. So they do have this perpetual easement. So we said, well, gee, sisters, you don't want this to be a wedding chapel. You want to develop a new mission and a new statement and reach out to the neighbors. What are you going to use it for? Not really sure yet. We're not sure what our mission's going to be. Okay, well, if you do have functions in the chapel, it might be nice to have some meeting and gathering space. So we designed what we call this area, the narthex, in through here, which allows them to have receptions and informal events, neighborhood meetings, and things like that. And there's also a small area over here, which is some administrative office for the sisters. One of the other things we were the beneficiary of is in the basement of the chapel itself, they always had all the mechanicals for the hospital coming through. So they never utilized it for anything. And in fact, if you go down the main aisle of the chapel, the floor slopes. So in the basement, the floor slopes. But we were able to fashion this space as a meeting room for them. So, we started doing all this stuff, and then they started thinking, well, gee, we can start holding programs here. We can start having school kids come in, and we can have musical events. So it's really going to be a great addition to the neighborhood. And I think they've had at least one musical event thus far, which I think was a pretty good success. It was out of town. But I think they really want to reach out and start this new mission and welcome anybody in the neighborhood in there. So, what do we do with this space? Basically, we had this space that was sandwiched between the high-rise building, and this was proposed and still is a 3-story building. So that created some problems for us. We said, well, gosh, Mr. Developer, thanks for giving us this space, but it's really not such a nice space. You have the high-rise on one side, and you have a wall on the other side. So, we said, well, how, as architects, can we design something that will be meaningful and special for the sisters, because they were given this very valuable little jewel of land in the city right by the park. So what we did was we created some pergolas out of ipe wood, which is a Brazilian wood, and they have a lot of Brazilian sisters here, so they were thrilled that we were using their hometown wood. And we created this axis in the narthex itself. It's on this semicircular form, and then it flattens out, and there's an axial termination right here, and there's a grotto right here where they had a statue in the old hospital. Maybe some of you might have remembered a statue of Mother Cabrini, and we were going to put it outside. This is where I talk about the statues. This is my part of the statue. But they got a appraisal on the statue, and basically it said, if you put that outside, you're nuts. We'll take your license away. There's no way. It's probably the most precious thing you have in this whole space. So we had to design another home for Mother Cabrini's statue, which I'll show in a second. But what that enabled us to do is, the developer provided us this great gate, this hedgerow. We have this beautiful garden in here, which I think they're going to keep it open sometimes for the public. But again, if they want to have a reception on the 5th of October, they had the rededication ceremony. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon, so everybody was outside. So that's how we envisioned the space being used, and it worked perfectly. Then further back in the space, because we had this strong axis here, we wanted to develop another strong axis here. It didn't work with the chapel that we had back here. So again, we finished the space off, created this rectangle, then we created a little water feature, which is similar to the one in Codogno, Italy, where she was born at her birthplace. And this is what we call the contemplative garden in the back. And it's, I really urge you to go over before it gets too cold out. and really experience the space. It's very nice. You go back here and you can just escape the city. It's very quiet. It's very nice. And just think about life. The next challenge we were faced with is, again, the developer, while he has a very nice building, we got this building with a traditional French, scoop at the corner. There was no street presence. There was nothing that said this is the National Shrine for Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini. It didn't say anything to the public to say, come in, we're here and we welcome you. So we started to do things. We designed a bronze door system which used the Sacred Heart, put in bronze crosses. It's a very fancy door which has a lot of symbolism to the church, and we hope it's interesting enough that it will start to draw people in. We get into that process a little bit, and the developer comes to us and says, Mark, did you ever think of doing something on the outside of the building, something really bold and big? I said, well, John, I'm glad you bring that up because yes, I think we can accomplish that. So what we did in somewhat the same architectural style, I think ours, there's more French, ours is a Roman Doric style. We created a peristyle, which is independent of the building. And for us, that was a real marker that says, look, we're here, we're the National Shrine of St. Francis Xavier Cabrini. We welcome you, please come in. So that was a big step in the right direction for us. We really needed that to get the sisters on the map. And boy, let me tell you, all summer long, I think I was there every day overseeing the work. And when this started going up and I was outside, people were just coming, wondering what's going on, what's in here, what are you doing? So I think it really serves, again, the function that we intended it. There'll be one last thing. We're going to put a little sign over here and another little sign up over there, but those are going to go in the spring, which will just tell you what it is and when their mass times and stuff like that are. So we designed this great bronze door system, which you go in the first door, then you're in a vestibule, and it leads you into a couple other areas. Then another bronze door, which is similar in design, but a little bit less detail. You can see how it actually turned out. This is all limestone, French lime, or Indiana limestone, and we gilded the letters up on top, and you can see the actual doors behind. And we think this is really successful and a nice addition to the neighborhood. So then you get past that second set of doors I mentioned, and then there was a great differential between sidewalk and where the chapel floor was. So we were faced with this issue. Well, how do you bring people in? You have to get them to ascend, 6 or 8 feet up into the chapel. Again, they had these doors, and they were bronze doors. That's where we got the idea for the other 2 sets of bronze doors. But they were closed. They had a panel inside them. So we investigated the doors, and we found that we were able to take out the stops, and if there was a panel inside that we were able to remove and put clear glass in there. Which, what that did for us was enabled you, once you get in the space, you were able to get up and look in. So again, it would hopefully draw you up and into the space. We, again, used the classical style to design the space in the narthex. Even though the chapel itself is kind of a mid-century deco, but we felt that this was fine. There's enough things that we did, I think, to tie the 2 spaces together to make it successful. One of the other really fancy things we did were down here. This is their crest of the Missionary Sisters, and we actually had this made out of terrazzo, which is really that colorful, and me and 2 other guys from the office had to actually go out and tell the terrazzo guys how to blend the terrazzo to get it to come out to our satisfaction. So again, this is a project that I really got heavily invested in. This is a view down the narthex, and you can see that curved wall. They've got a couple of screens up which tell more about Mother Cabrini than I've mentioned tonight. I think I'm even on one of these videos if you look. And then we've got these 4 basic panels, and there's some documentation and a portrait of Mother Cabrini over on this side. We put an oculus in at the top, again, which has a passage from the Philippians, which which Mother Cabrini always recited. And we also put some of the stenciling, which you'll see on the inside of the chapel, which really starts to tie the two spaces together. This is the statue I mentioned, and as an architect, I think this is the best little surprise that the whole project had to offer for us. When they told us we couldn't put this outside, we'd be crazy to. Sister Joan turned to us and said, "Okay, well then where do we put it?" Boy, I had not a clue where it should go. But through the process, Greg, the business manager, didn't want us to put anything in this area. It wasn't quite configured like this, but he didn't want us to put anything in that area. So that was perfect. So I said, okay, I think I've got the place for it. Let me design something. So we continued with the same design and wood wainscot that we have in the narthex, and we created this great little niche for Mother's statue. Again, we used the terrazzo marble base. And these two panels were panels from the door that we took out and put the glass in. So we were able to reuse again some of the existing panels. And I think it creates a really fantastic backdrop to Mother's statue. And the last thing I'll leave you with is the actual chapel itself. Inside the chapel, we really didn't change a lot of the architecture. We just worked with what was there, and we wanted to redo the plaster, and as soon as we picked a little bit of it, we found asbestos, and we had to replace the whole, all 4 barrels. And when I got up here into the murals up in the top and into the cupola, you could almost blow the paint off the frescoes. So we spent a good portion of the summer restoring the frescoes. We also replaced the copper roof. If anybody's been by, we replaced the copper roof before construction had started, because that was really our best chance to do it before the building was built and everything was finished. Plus we also had some leaks up in the roof that was damaging some of the plaster, so we were able to repair that. So really the charge on the interior of the chapel was we re-lamped everything with more energy efficient lamps. We restored the frescoes. We cleaned the travertine marble all the way up and around. I think when you were there, Vi, didn't we have scaffolding floor to ceiling throughout the entire place? And it was absolutely a director's set here. You couldn't see anything. And I think it turned out really well. We introduced this red color on the 3 barrels, which I think is really a great, again, it was all about a rebirth and a new image within the neighborhood. So I really felt strongly to introduce this red color, and then I have some nice stenciling around the semicircle and the flat part of the arch, which we brought back then into the lobby. So again, while the architectural style is not the same, we tried to tie the two areas together. And the red, boy, was that controversial. They were very concerned, and a lot of the sisters were scared, and they didn't want the change. And but Sister Joan believed in us again, and she said, if that's what you think it should be, let's go ahead and paint it. So she was really great in that regard. We painted it, and everybody loves it now, and it really fits in. It matches the baldacchino reds. There's some other red highlights in the stained glass windows. And we're really proud of the project, and like I said, it's been a real labor of love for me for the last 10 years. Thank you.
I want to talk about, some of the things that I've been involved with in the community, and something that's probably you've all seen, a kind of composition that involves 3 sculptures and actually the creation of a place that's part of John Pope Park on the corner of Sheffield, Wrightwood, and Lincoln. As been mentioned, I've been a resident of the community since the early 70s, having the studio on Little Street, which is just 1 block south of Wrightwood, and actually is 1 block north of Altgeld Street. And from the during the early days with the development of the neighborhood, the Lincoln Park Conservation Association, Wrightwood neighbors that I'd been a member of early on. There was where this park now exists, a trolley barn, which took up the whole space of the park. So one would need to imagine a building about 3 stories high, going from Sheffield back to the alley just before Seminary, and from Little Street to Wrightwood. During those days, the Chicago Transit Authority, which had taken that facility over from the Chicago Railway Systems Company, which had built it in 1909, they stored snow removal equipment and salt in the building, and also they stored the salt, and anyway, it was leaching through the brick structure, and the structure was condemned and taken down. And I think it was a real stroke of genius that people, the Wrightwood neighbors, Lincoln Park Conservation Association, had the property transferred to the Chicago Park District for the creation of a neighborhood park that, of course, has been a boon to the citizen and spurred development around it, and created an opportunity not only for recreational activities, ballpark, tennis courts, volleyball, children's playground, but at one of the Wrightwood neighborhood meetings, some people said, well, you know, why shouldn't we have a sculpture in the park? And people turned to me, well, you're a sculptor, and you've done things around, why not here? And I actually didn't think it was a bad idea either. And through a combination of the interests of the Park District, the Wrightwood neighbors, Lincoln Park Conservation Association, and others, a committee was formed that developed funds to do this. And the thought, too, was, well, what would it be? Apart from being an artist, I have an interest in history, Chicago history, American history, world history. But anyway, the fact that John Peter Altgeld had been a resident in the community, street just south of where the park was named for him, it seemed like an interesting idea to have something that sort of spoke about him in the community. So anyway, among other things, I was interested in the fact that there was a guy, Harry Barnard, who written a book about Altgeld, the Eagle Who Was Forgotten. Altgeld, as you all know, pardon some of the Haymarket rioters, incurred the wrath of people like the early Marshall Field and others, the Tribune. And even at that time, some elder residents of the community, when they found out we were going to do an Altgeld sculpture, said, a sculpture to that anarchist? But anyway, and that was interesting too, that there, and I'll show that as we go on. There is a more historic and a portrait sculpture of Altgeld in Lincoln Park near Diversity. But anyway, there was this book, The Eagle Is Forgotten, that was a biography of Altgeld. And it was interesting to me that the piece, the book's title came from a poem written by the Illinois poet Vachel Lindsay, The Eagle Is Forgotten. And as a matter of fact, one prominent donor to the project said, who really took the poem to heart, said, well, I'll make a significant contribution if you have a plaque that has the poem on it as well, which is part of the base of the piece. And then there's another element in the base of the significant donors, a few elements of these eagles. So one of the things I thought too was that not just to make a sculpture, and of course I don't do portrait sculpture, so I wasn't going to be in competition with Gutzon Borglum, who did the sculpture of Altgeld that's in Lincoln Park. But and then part of the idea was to create a place, so to make the corner, to define it in a way that was different from the rest of the park. And so instead of having one column, I thought I'd have three, which gives you an opportunity to, in placing them around, create a space, and then to create this sort of step up so that the change in grade from the field beyond the corner sloped up to it and interacted with the berm that had been created around the perimeter of the park. So anyway, the idea of the three eagle columns in different sizes and actually in kind of different styles. I mean, one rather sort of simple one to the back, and another one a little more complicated, and then a kind of more flourishing one in the back. And then, by the way, my studio and all is the large building that you see on the other side of the street of the park. To me, it was a wonderful opportunity to interact both with the designers of the park and the kind of community activists that were involved in the Wrightwood Neighbors and the Lincoln Park Conservation Association to bring somewhat more contemporary take on Altgeld's legacy to the community, and then to refer back to a Chicago author and an Illinois poet, Barnard the biographer and Vachel Lindsay the poet. So anyway, that this piece was begun in about '87 and installed in 1989. Much less prominent, and I don't know if it has to do with the time this was done. There were a lot of people who thought, well, we don't want to have a monument to an anarchist in Lincoln Park. But this is over kind of in a wooded area, just south of Diversity, just east of that drive that comes in off of Diversity. Shows Altgeld, a bronze, but with really an interesting stone base and surround. Gutzon Borglum's signature. As you all know, Gutzon Borglum, of course, the four presidents carved into the mountain. He also did a number of sculptures in other places. And as a matter of fact, just a personal note, when I was in the Army in Fort Sam Houston, I had an opportunity of having a temporary stay, place to work in a studio that had been designed for him when he was there to do a monument to the Texas Trail Drivers, which was in a park in San Antonio. But anyway, here's alt gal with mother, child, sort of protecting them, and in a sort of dynamic pose, looking out toward the lake. And I think it's a small but very fine sculpture. Then in Lincoln Park, I mean, it's interesting to me how in recent years the Lincoln Park has become, as has been mentioned before, the home, both permanent and temporary, to many sculpture exhibitions. This piece near the Notebark Museum called Roots, actually this got a little bit mixed up there. There's this piece by Ellsworth Kelly, a minimalist, and inspired by the I will spirit, as he mentions on the plaque, dedicated to the I will spirit of Chicago. This piece, welded steel abstraction drawn from roots and trees, dynamically posed in juxtaposition to the Notebark Museum by this artist Steve Tobin. Steel Roots it's called. And then another one in front of the museum, Bison, by Chris Williams. It's interesting to me, and something that I feel as a sculptor very gratified by, the way, the many ways, as you see in the different examples, that sculpture comes to be part of the community's not only cultural, recreational life, and just sort of part of the fabric of the community. I'll end my little thing by referring to this Alexander Hamilton statue, which of course is there right by Diversity. It's interesting to me too, the kind of life of sculptures in the community. When I was an art student, going to School of Art Institute in the middle 50s, there was an architect, designer, Samuel Marks, who did a very modernist base for the Beaux-Arts sculpture of Alexander Hamilton. I can't remember how many years ago. And as a matter of fact, this guy, Marks, did a lot of things. He did architecture, and he designed the Pullman railway cars. But anyway, and I wish I'd been able to dig up a picture of it, but there was this cantilevered base with Hamilton perched on it. Now this is probably more appropriate because there it is, this solid base, maybe appropriate to the first Secretary of the Treasury. It seemed to be, at least when the base was changed to this much more conventional one, that the other base could harbor either homeless people or criminals or whatever, and made the park less safe, which is, of course, a consideration. But anyway, and then the idea that the statue, instead of being bronze, left to patina, has been gold leaf, which which I guess is another appropriate symbol for the Secretary of the Treasury. It's getting a little green now. It'll probably need to be recoated in a few years. But it's interesting, too, to contrast now the work we see in the parks, contemporary works, both permanent and on a temporary basis, within Lincoln Park, the community as well as the park itself, sculptures that are there for a year instead of for the ages, but provides really what I think is a lively presence, and then it invites, I think, people to contrast what's being done today with what was done years ago, and for the reasons commemoration and memorialization that have been talked about earlier, which is very important, but also to have in our presence evidence of what's going on today by people who are alive and working. And again, I think it's really a contribution to the life of the community that there is the kind of interest in the community that projects these things. And then, of course, there's this homage to Goethe, the soul of the German people, with which I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you. I forgot about sort of the tail end, which are just a couple other pieces of mine which are in the community. Flight forms at the entrance, the south entrance to Midway Airport. A piece called We Will, sort of thinking about I will, but saying, well, we will in a more collective way of thinking about this downtown, by the Cultural Center and the Heritage Building at Millennium Park. And then Freeform on the facade of the State of Illinois building, the older State of Illinois building that was renovated in the late 80s, early 90s. Anyway, it's a pleasure to join my fellow panelists and work with you. Thank you very much.
Well, that was really fun. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Well, I'm going to start, and hopefully you guys will just jump right in. And that's a portable mic. So Richard, I actually was involved with the project with the Hamilton, and I should have given you some of the older pictures of the Hamilton, and so I just want to kind of throw it out to sculpture, and changes with sculpture can be very controversial. Of course, I'm a preservationist, so I'm usually advocating to try to keep things the way they are or make them the way they were. And that was a very interesting, and you brought up some of the issues about that, and you never really revealed exactly what your thoughts were about Sam Marx's taking apart his cantilever. But I was involved with that actually because that was a piece that was, believe it or not, part of the Buckingham Fund. Kate Buckingham was obsessed with Hamilton because of his contributions to banking and the fact that her family made a fortune in America because of the banking system. And so she decided that the city should have this Hamilton monument. And apparently she wanted it to be the very tallest monument in Chicago. I don't know if you know this story. And she hired Saarinen and was going around with Saarinen at the lakefront and saying that she wants it to be 250 feet tall. Oh my God. And the South Park commissioners at that point were working with her, and they were saying, Miss Buckingham, please go look at this building located on Michigan Avenue. That's not even 250 feet tall. Are you sure you mean 250 feet tall? And this resulted in a lawsuit with Saarinen. So this whole monument, she hired John Angel, the classical Beaux-Arts artist, to create the the bronze, which was gilded gold, but they still never resolved how are they going to make this thing as tall as Miss Buckingham wanted. And then there was the wartime ban on construction, so they still couldn't build it, and then Miss Buckingham died, and then it was the Chicago Park District that took over, and now what do you do? So they hired this architect who I think was a very good architect. He did the interior of the pump room. I think he did some beautiful interiors and created this very modernist, maybe some of you remember it, cantilevered, kind of almost like a giant plinth. And so once I got into the picture with a whole group of Park District people, the Art Institute was concerned because they believed that it was having structural failure. So not only were homeless people sleeping there, but they were afraid that they may actually the whole thing may come crashing down on them. So it was a bit controversial, and I do remember a few meetings, and of course my job was, at that point my contention was, well, there was a significant historic landscape and we can recreate it. Well, of course, the cantilever came down and we never did really recreate the historic landscape. So now we have similar kinds of issues. I'm sure many people in this neighborhood know about the controversy of the Linnaeus, which is now over at the Midway. And so I'm just wondering, you kind of hedged around the issue about how you felt about the monument, whether you think it, diminishes its significance, missing that odd, you did sort of indicate that they were an odd marriage. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that piece, but also just your thoughts about those of us who are involved in these kinds of decisions. Where do you stand on how conservative we should be?
Well, I think these things need to be taken case by case, and I said, I had the privilege of knowing Samuel Marks, as a matter of fact, and respected him very much as an architect, like you say, designed the pump room, various other buildings on the Gold Coast, and worked to design the Pullman car, and quite a collector, as a matter of fact, of modern art, but I happen to think that the setting for the Hamilton was one of his least successful projects. While it had a certain daring do about it, my own sort of approach to art, and of course, it's interesting. I just sort of threw that in there, but I'm glad it initiated this discussion. So I'm more informed about the project thanks to you, and of course the rest of the audience is as well. But that I think the present base on which Hamilton stands is actually sort of modern. It's not like a base that you normally associate with that kind of figure. So it has something modern about it, and a kind of simplicity
and that base actually was part of the whole installation.
Yeah.
So they just took it with the base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, but there are different times when another thing is forever is a long time. That is to say, when we like to think about monuments, and withstanding the test of time and one thing and another. But even if you go, whether it's in the United States or countries where there are things that date from the Renaissance or Greek or Roman times, they are, the subject of constant restoration and all, and different interpretations at different times. Sometimes there have been periods when the tendency was to actually remake parts of fragmented works of art and attach them. Sometimes that actually attaching them sort of just disrupted or even destroyed or weakened the original things. And, you know, now we look at preserving things as they were, keeping acid rain off, destroying more. So anyway, I would just argue for a sort of cautious, case-by-case review of various kinds of conservation, structural problems as they occur.
I like that answer as a preservationist. And I also have to say, and I want you guys to know that those microphones are for you because we want to hear from you. Yeah, can you come right up to the microphone? And as you're walking up, I just want to mention that another amazing thing that I think that Richard did was we were having problems with those skateboarders at the Altgeld Monument in Johnville Park, and he worked with the Park District to design a whole system of deterrence so that skateboarders can't skateboard on the monument and ruin it anymore. Yes, sir?
First of all,
does it work after all this system that we've created? If not, we have this extra mic up here. Is it on? Okay.
first of all, I think I can talk about the crowd. First and foremost, I want to say how happy I am that I'm talking before Alan Mellis, otherwise I wouldn't have. Was there much of a brouhaha? And who made the final decision about facing Alexander south rather than north? Can you speak to that, please?
Well, that was the sculpture conservator absolutely insisted that he has to face that way, and people still complain about it, but we get a lot of complaints about a lot of things, so. do you have any, does anybody want to add to the fact that it's sort of odd that you come into the park and see the back of Alexander Hamilton? Do you want to? Oh.
I would think Lakeview would have something to say about it.
People do complain about it, but we do get a lot of complaints. So now, if you guys want to pass, if you have comments, just grab the mic. They're too polite here. Did you want to add anything, Krista? She never noticed it. And
I never noticed it. I think that in my recollection, all of the statues direct for the most part south, with the exception of the Schiller statue, that one looks north. And it seemed to me when I was doing my book that it was helpful when they did look south because we got really nice sunlight on the front of them. And with the Schiller statue looking north, it was very difficult for me to photograph it and because I worked from a photograph for the paintings, it was very difficult to photograph it and never get light on it. And that's the one painting that I did from a night photograph where I did a flash that showed up on the statue because I could not get it in light. So I thought it was done on purpose.
It was done on purpose because our sculpture conservator does kind of play a role in these things, and we're very lucky that we have one of the national experts in Chicago on sculpture conservation who's also worked with Richard before.
You know, I have to say that, you know, I just saw the sculpture facing south, you know, when it was installed, and I thought, well, that's the way it would go. But it just occurs to me as you say that, the Saint-Gauden sculpture of Lincoln in Grant Park faces south. The Saint-Gauden sculpture of Lincoln in Lincoln Park faces south. The Benjamin Franklin sculpture in Lincoln Park faces south.
It works well. It does work.
Actually, I think Benjamin Franklin is.
Well, that one's moved around so many times, it's hard to keep track of. But a lot of the...
Right under
Yeah.
Southward, southwest.
Yeah. Okay, Alan.
I just thought this was an absolutely wonderful program, so I want to congratulate the panelists and also the Lake Park Research Committee.
Thank you, Carl.
Just one anecdote, when Richard was working with neighbors on Eagle Columns, we applied for National Endowment for the Arts grant.
Right.
And one of the questions on the questionnaire was how many people are going to see this? So Sarah Leonard, who was heading up the effort to write the grant, wrote 100,000. People said 100,000 people a day? Well, because it's visible from the
From the L. Oh, that was a wonderful idea. Very good.
And then the second thing is, I just think Alderman Daly is in the audience that, you know, she started was originally the Lincoln Park Sculpture exhibit, and became the Lakeview Sculpture exhibit, now the Chicago Sculpture exhibit. So whenever one reference new modern sculpture that's going up to complement all the sculpture there, we really owe a round of applause to Alderman Daly.
I have to tell you that one of my jobs is to document the sculptures for the Park District, as Alderman Daly knows. And so we have this web-based guide to the sculptures. And when Alderman Daly was in office, there would be so many new sculptures all of the time that people would call me, and I was so embarrassed I'd immediately have to call her staff because I didn't know, even if they were in the park, they were happening so quickly. So that was always kind of my little hidden thing, was that I would very quickly dial her office. Yes, sir.
Hi, this question's for Mark. The Mother Cabrini Chapel, could you tell everybody here about the foundation? What is the foundation for that chapel?
Yeah, it's a good point. While it was built in the mid-50s, the chapel itself is built on wood piles, just like Venice. The original architect for the building was an Italian architect, as the stained glass windows are from Florence, as is the marble. They really imported kept a lot of Italians working for one time, me included. So it was built on wood piles, so that when, one of the things we had to negotiate with the tower when they were building the tower is that wood piles are very structurally sound as long as they stay either dry or wet. That's why Venice hasn't sunk, because they're always wet when they're building. So we said, well, gee, when you're building your tower, you're going down like 3 levels. So you're going to expose our foundations, number one, which could crumble the chapel, and number two, you're going to dry out our wood piles. So we had to devise a whole, it's called a wood secant, or it's a secant system, which is basically a series of corkscrews all the way around the entire chapel, and they fill it with concrete. So the chapel itself now is in somewhat of a bathtub, and we've got a recharge system which monitors the water level. So in times of drought, if it gets too dry, it pumps water in, and then when we have our heavy rains, so not to flood the whole thing out, it pumps water out.
And I want to ask, it's so beautiful, and I've never been in there before. Can the public just wander in there, or are there certain hours?
It's open daily. I don't know their hours, they're changing them, I think it opens at like 10 to 5.
And you can just wander right
You
in?
can just wander right in, and I think they're going to have supervised tours and docents. I don't know if that's in place yet, but if you go in and ask questions, or you want to go see the shrine rooms, the reliquary, you're certainly welcome to do that. I think they'll like some of the chapels that are. You can probably go everywhere except the local.
Wow, that's wonderful. Okay, yes, sir.
Yes, continuing on with controversy and statues, among the statues in Lincoln Park, is it true that the Goethe statue took a few years to get installed in the park because of the First World War? Apparently there was some strong opinion that the statue dedicated to the mastermind of the German people ought to be installed a few years later rather than in the middle of the war. And number two, is it true, on a lighter note, is it true that the statue of General Sheridan over by Belmont Avenue used to get a paint job every time the Cubs win?
No, it was the San Francisco Giants. This time you can't blame the vandalism on Chicagoans. The San Francisco Giants, when the team would come and play, they would make the rookies go and vandalize the sculpture. And I think, Alderman Daly, weren't you involved? There was like a stakeout. I don't know if that was your ward or if that was right out. If it was the next alderman over, there was a stakeout because they knew when they were going to play the Giants that this is what was going to happen. And so they literally had the police staking out all night one night. And I think that word spread, and I think they actually weren't able to bust them, but I think it finally slowed down that tradition. But again, the sculpture conservator who's worked with the Park District for years, Andrzej Dajnowski, he was always railing against the San Francisco Giants. That's the right name of that team, isn't it? The San Francisco Giants, with the purple paint in a not very nice place. So I'm going to throw the other historical question to Krista.
I think it was installed right before World War I started. What was the date that World War I started in 1914?
17.
19 what?
17.
1914, right?
14 for the war, 17
Yeah, America
I don't
got,
know a month it started, but
America got involved in
this
1817.
statue was installed in June of 1914, so I think it was about the time when it was starting. I gave a tour one time, and someone on my tour made a comment, and he thought, which I thought was a very good comment, he said that was probably the last year that they could have installed that statue in the park because of the war. And in doing my research, I did find many articles in the newspapers later on where people wanted that statue taken down because the Germans were so unpopular.
Yes, sir.
Yes, one time I visited Vicksburg, and I believe that there's a similar statue of General Grant in Vicksburg that's similar to the one in Chicago. And the second question is, you talked about some of the missing statues, and could you enlighten us as to why they were missing, just vandalism or what?
I believe I've read that the Vicksburg statue was by the same man who did our Hans Christian Andersen statue, whose name I'm drawing a blank right now. I'll peek here. I'll cheat. Our Hans Christian Andersen statue was in Gerhard.
No, it's a Danish.
Offerings.
Well, while she's looking, I do want to mention that we've actually been replicating some of the missing sculptures. So Krista's book, unfortunately, is a little out of date already. The Swedenborg Monument, there was a really fantastic story that not the part that it had gotten stolen, but about 3 summers ago, a drunk driver crashed into it, and all that had been left of the Swedenborg was the base. And then when the Park District couldn't, replicate the bronze or didn't even think of it, they put this kind of goofy pyramidal shape. You remember that?
Yeah.
It's on the east side of Lakeshore Drive, kind of near Diversey Harbor. And so about 3 years ago, after this drunk driver crashed into the base, the Park District decided to replicate the monument. And there is the Swedenborg, his great-great-grandson is affiliated with the Swedenborgian Museum in Pennsylvania. And he had called me years ago and collected information about the Swedenborg and posted it online. And somebody from Sweden contacted him and said, we have the original plaster casting of your sculpture, because he saw the pictures of it on this guy's website. So it's actually an actual casting of the real monument. Tomorrow, the Children's Fountain, this was the Francis Willard Monument, will be installed. I think at 10 o'clock, if you guys feel like going and watching. We tried to coordinate it with WTTW because they want to go and film it. And that is that horse trough, which is sort of kitty corner from the History Museum.
Yeah.
And that was another one of those crazy projects that took years and years of research. The original one was in Chicago at the World's Columbian Exposition. And then there were copies of our sculpture in a couple of other cities because it was about temperance. And if you drink good fresh water, you won't feel like running out to the tavern, right? And so there was one in Portland, Oregon, and so the Park District was able to make a casting of that. So you might want to watch that tomorrow. And then you were going to talk about...
Well, anyway, I believe that the Vicksburg statue was by Johannes, who did our Hans Christian Andersen statue. But often at that time, Grant was shown on a horse because he was known for what he did in the Civil War, for being a war hero. But there is some thought today, because Grant's popularity, we don't know him the way he was known at that time. His reputation has declined. And so there has been some thought that people don't really connect to war heroes in the same way today as they did back then. And so Grant also was wonderful in other ways too, and so people talk, maybe we should show Grant other ways. As far as the other missing statues, they are very interesting stories. There were 3 statues that were stolen from the park. Probably they were melted down for the value of the bronze. They were not full statues, they were busts. There was a Beethoven bust in the park, Swedenborg bust was stolen, and the original Fountain Girl statue was stolen. And it was estimated that the bronze would have been worth maybe $10,000 for a bust. And the other statues, there was a Renee statue that was moved, there was a Garibaldi statue that was moved, there was an American Doughboy statue in Lincoln Park that was so badly vandalized that it was lost because it was hollow on the inside, and those American Doughboy statues honor the memory of World War I heroes. There are hundreds of them across the country, and we still have one in Chicago. When they were refurbishing Soldier Field, someone thought that we did have one in storage, one that had been in Garfield Park that had also been damaged, and they refurbished it, and it's in Soldier Field now. When I went to the Bon Jovi concert, I saw it. But yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting stories, and it's fun to learn about them.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm a volunteer at Mother Cabrini Chapel. I have to disagree with Mr. Sullivan in an object. He said that when they reconstructed it, it came out pretty well. That chapel is fantastic.
He's getting nervous over here.
You walk in those doors, those second set of doors, and your jaw drops. It is that beautiful.
Well, you know what, I have a feeling you guys better make sure there's plenty of, that the doors are open wide tomorrow, because we've got 175 people that are going to want to come and see
I'm going to tell you something. One of the disappointing things of the chapel that I see as a volunteer, that we don't have enough people to come and visit. Now, I realize that the chapel is new, and work probably has not gotten out yet. Visiting hours are from 10 to 3 every day. On Saturday, it's from like 9 to 4. There's a Mass on Saturday at 4 o'clock, Mass on Sunday at 10 o'clock. And you know, you don't have to be Catholic to come in. I mean, you can walk in there, so seriously. I mean, it's just such a thing of beauty. And there are some docents around that will explain some of the various aspects of the chapel. All you have to do is just come in and ask. Again, you're more than free. You don't have to come in to say a prayer. It'd be nice if you do. But I mean, you can walk around and just admire the beauty and the job that Mr. Sullivan has done in this chapel.
Well, thank you. Thanks for saying that.
And this is not a paid advertisement.
I just wanted to say I'm Jewish and I love churches, so.
Well, you'll love this chapel.
I had no idea until I heard about this panel.
When the chapel of the project was almost done, I had some friends come over. They wanted to go to lunch, and I said, well, I'm a block away, why don't you come on over and we'll go to have lunch. And they're Jewish, a Jewish couple. And they walked through and they were getting the same kind of response. I thought, oh my gosh, beautiful, oh my gosh, it's so good. And I introduced my friends to Sister Joan, and I kind of made a joke and say, well, here's your first convert, Sister Joan. And my client Mark said to me, he said, well, Mark, I love this place, it's not real churchy.
Well, it was with the gentleman who came up, and you had told us it was the whole thing was such a love fest with the nuns, and it was so non-controversial, and then he said he's a volunteer and he's got a big problem with it. Oh no, we weren't forewarned about this, so that was great. And here's a friend. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Julia, how are you?
Good.
I have a question for you. I want to make a few statements before about moving sculptures. One, the Garibaldi, I happen to live in the community where the Garibaldi statue was moved into, and I'd like to thank Lincoln Park because it's in Garibaldi Park now by the University of Illinois Chicago in a very nice park. I think the base is the base still in Lincoln Park?
Yeah. The base was so heavy that they couldn't figure out how to move it. Yeah. So it sits there, yeah.
It's a nice base. And then the other thing is, when we worked on a project with you to move again, I feel like we're stealing statues from Lincoln Park. But the Schulte, Sir George Schulte bust from the front of the conservatory.
Which was a great project because it was, I think you probably would all agree that it was so poorly sited in the formal garden. We have some of our Lincoln Park docents here, and Norm Radel used to love to give tours. He would stand right behind it and say, I know this seems a little odd that you see the back of the guy's head, but every time I went to the symphony, that's what I saw anyway.
But when that project moving into was on, and you and I talked about this, it was on a beautiful base.
Right.
Limestone base. That sculpture that went on that base originally was part of the Daily News sanitarium for women and children.
Right. Yeah, we still have some work to do.
Right, so that's what I want to bring, that sculpture is beautiful. The original sculpture that went on that base
Right.
was at the Daily
The
News.
Caritas.
Right.
The Caritas. Yep.
Sanitarium where they
And this is an example of how things have changed in terms of now there's so much more of a conscience and that we're trying to restore art and getting to do great things like working with Richard Hunt to design deterrents and restore. I mean, that was a major project that just took place to fix that monument. But the Caritas, which was one of the few historic pieces that was actually done by a woman, Ida McClellan Stout, was in front of the Daily News Fresh Air Sanitarium, and it was kind of this mother figure holding children. And because they lopped off the front of the building when they built the ramps for Lakeshore Drive in the 1930s with the WPA funding, they took the monument and they put it in storage. Well, eventually it found its way to the Garfield Park Conservatory. So some well-meaning person, but not terribly knowledgeable, thought, well, we have the Taft marbles at the conservatory, and those are white, so we don't want a brown bronze, so they painted it white, probably with house paint or something. And so that poor sculpture, not only was she separated from her gorgeous original base, but she also was painted white. So when Bob had talked about wanting to move the Schulte and design a special garden just for that monument, which is just fabulous, and we made him aware of the fact that it had kind of robbed this beautiful base, he worked hard to make sure they got a new base, and so now the old base is sort of waiting to be reunited with the monument.
I'm glad you told that story. I think it's an interesting story that people should know.
Yeah, and if people have no funding sources, or maybe Alderman Daly has a lot of spare time now to help do fundraising for sculptures, we have a whole list that we could that need some attention. So,
Thank you.
okay.
Great. I'd like to thank Paul. It's been a wonderful program. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to end this program, isn't it? That's terrific. Oops, and Fran is going to give us a quick closing remark.
I had a question.
So if you will, indulge me for just a minute or two to say some thank yous. Let me mention before I even do that Bob O'Neill is the man that just spoke, and Bob O'Neill is the president of the Grant Park Conservancy Board. Is that what you're waiting to hear about? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, excuse me. Go right ahead.
I just had a question. First, I love your book. This book is fantastic. And when I saw it at Barnes & Noble, I was so excited because I've been teaching kids about monuments. I think it's so important. I wanted to find out Park District, or if there's any movement to get this into the third grade curriculum throughout Illinois to teach about Chicago, because this is fantastic. This is really important to teach us history, Chicago history. You know, it'd be lovely. I know that on your website you have information about
we don't sell books, unfortunately. I've written a few too, so they don't sell my books either. I would encourage you to, let people know, and that's part of why I wanted to be about part of this too. And I think there's a lot of growing excitement about it. It is a very beautiful book, and maybe somebody has a connection with CPS. I don't know.
Will you be autographing these things?
I will, thanks. Thank you. Does anybody else have a question? I didn't want to cut anybody off. Sorry about that. Okay. Well, then, let me indulge me for a second, please. So to begin, first of all, I want to recognize that Alderman Michelle Smith is with us tonight, and we are very grateful for that. Thank you, Michelle, for being with us and for supporting us. Secondly, I want to, of course, thank our magnificent panelists. Really, we were all so excited about you, but you surpassed our greatest expectations. So, Richard Hunt, Mark Sullivan, Krista August, and Julia Bachrach, fabulous, wonderful. Lastly, these programs don't happen by magic. There are a lot of people that work on them, and so somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was you, Richard, First of all, tonight's program is sponsored by Bridgeview Bank, but we are continually sponsored and supported by the neighborhood organizations, the Wrightwood Neighbors Association, the Sheffield Neighbors Association, the Mid-North Association, I haven't forgotten anybody, and many private donors that help us put these programs on, because as you know, they're free, and it's something that for DePaul University really is a joy to be able to share our resources with all of you. So we thank you for that. And personally speaking, in my very own office, there are 4 people that are here tonight that you saw them bustling about, I'm sure. That would be Julie M's right here, whom I could not survive. Shauna Smith, who is probably out in the back, and I can't survive without her. Brian Chaplin taking pictures here, and Mary Foley, who's also out there. Somebody in the audience mentioned to me that the Chicago Architecture Foundation gives tours of the sculptures in the park, I believe, Krista, right? May through September or May through October every year. So take advantage of that. I will, I know, because it sounds absolutely fabulous. Lastly, this is concluding the formal part of our program, but you are most welcome to stay and continue the conversation informally with each other, with our panelists, if they'll stay around. And thank you for coming, and we'll let you know about our next program in the spring.